No sirens. No shouting. Just quiet coordination. As if the officers didn't want to disturb the books on the shelves. Children were inside the Midtown Public Library laughing over storybooks, never realizing they were sharing the room with a man police had waited 55 years to corner. Retired Principal Leonard Thorne, the smiling elder who came to donate books to the kids, stood at the center of all that innocence holding a box labeled, "For the Future." Parents waved at him, grateful for his generosity. Some whispered about how much he'd done for the community. His name had been associated with awards, scholarships, and graduation speeches. Nobody imagined that every step he took through the children's section made police tighten their formation outside. They didn't want panic. They just wanted him. When the officers closed in, he didn't struggle. He didn't gasp, ask why, or demand a lawyer. His calm face showed none of the shock the crowd felt. It was as if he had been expecting this moment for decades, waiting for it, almost relieved that it finally arrived. He placed the box of children's books on a table softly, as if nothing in the world was more important than keeping them in perfect condition. A mother's voice broke the stillness. "Why are you arresting him? That's Mr. Thorne. Everyone knows him." The silence that followed hit harder than any headline. Phones came out, recording, flashing, live streaming. Within minutes, comments spread like wildfire across social platforms. "Beloved principal arrested for murder. This can't be real. Not him." Police guided him out past wide-eyed children, the same age as the girl who vanished in 1966. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. For decades, parents trusted him with the people they treasured most. Kids marched across graduation stages under his applause, holding diplomas he signed. Former students wrote letters thanking him for shaping their lives. Churches invited him to speak about the importance of guiding the young. No scandal, no complaint, not even a rumor followed him. If a stranger needed a definition of trust, many in town would have pointed to Leonard Thorne. So when the videos of his arrest exploded online, they didn't just shake residents, they shattered their sense of judgment. People argued in comment sections as if their own memories were under attack. "There must be a mistake. He taught me to read. I refuse to believe this." Others weren't so sure. They stared at his calm expression in those videos and felt something they hadn't noticed before. Something cold. Something that didn't match the man they thought they knew. A retired teacher who worked with him for 30 years posted, "There was always something unreadable about him. He cared in ways that looked too perfect." That comment gained traction. Not because it proved anything, but because it felt unsettlingly honest. People began sharing old photos, school yearbooks, newspaper clippings celebrating his achievements. Every smiling picture suddenly looked different. Parents who once praised him started replaying memories. The time he insisted on escorting students to their buses. The way he lectured about protecting children. How he seemed to know every kid's habits, preferences, secrets, even those they never told their parents. Some started to wonder, was that care or control? For 55 years, a missing girl's name faded from public memory. Leonard Thorne kept earning respect. He built trust brick by brick, while a question waited quietly in the shadows. Did they applaud a killer for half a century? Long before the videos, the hashtags, and the shock-filled comments, there was a case file tucked inside a dusty storage box. A girl whose name once echoed through every home in town. A disappearance no one could solve, but no one could forget. Her parents begged police to search every corner, every classroom, every abandoned building. For years, one question stayed in the air like a stubborn echo. Where did Angela Bennett go? Detectives retired, new ones arrived, and time buried their leads under memories that faded. Evidence grew cold, witnesses moved away, and the world kept spinning. Yet that file never truly closed. It waited in silence, as birthdays passed, as her parents aged, As communities changed, some cops carried guilt for not solving it. Others whispered that the truth was always close, but no one had dared touch it. What made the case impossible wasn't lack of suspects, it was the arrogance of certainty. Everyone believed they knew who was innocent. Everyone trusted the same person. The man who organized search teams, who comforted Angela's parents, who gave speeches about protecting students. The man people called a role model. Years later, technology began digging into truths the town had ignored. An item sealed in evidence, something investigators kept just in case, held a story no one recognized in 1966. Time didn't protect the person who left it behind. It preserved the mistake they made. When that old evidence spoke again, it pointed with precision at a man the community had honored for most of his life. That's when police stopped treating the case as history and started preparing for a quiet arrest inside a library. Not because they were unsure, but because they finally knew. They waited 55 years for proof strong enough to tear apart the image of a community hero. Before the arrest, the town used to brag about how safe it felt. Parents let their kids walk to school, ride their bikes, and play outside until sunset. They trusted the system, trusted the adults in charge, trusted the man who shook hands with every student on their first day of class. But as those handcuffs locked around Leonard Thorne's wrists, a terrifying question began to rise among parents, one they didn't dare say out loud. How well do we really know the people we hand our children to? Videos of his arrest didn't just show a man losing freedom. They showed a community losing certainty. If someone so loved, so respected, so good, could hide something this brutal for decades, who else might be hiding behind manners and smiles? Who else do children admire today that might be remembered for the wrong reasons tomorrow? Parents found themselves thinking back to school drop-offs, teacher conferences, after-school chats. They remembered trusting individuals simply because everyone else trusted them. They remembered believing in character based on reputation, not truth. For the first time, they questioned their instincts, not because they were ignorant, but because they were human. And humans believe what they want to believe. The arrest didn't just reopen an old case. It reopened a fear that makes the heart tighten. Monsters don't always look like threats. Sometimes, they look like mentors. Angela Bennett didn't get warnings. Not even a hint. She vanished before the world could teach her to be careful. The adults who could have protected her applauded the same man who may have taken her life. As parents watched the news unfold, a painful realization settled in. If trust can be faked, safety can be stolen. Angela Schweitzer never competed for attention. It found her naturally. She had a way of making people feel seen without trying. A quiet, warm presence that others leaned toward. Teachers remembered her not only for her grades, but for the way she helped classmates who struggled, offering patience when others would groan or give up. She didn't chase the spotlight, yet somehow, the spotlight always chased her. Her laugh was a familiar sound on campus. Not loud, but honest. The kind that lifted heavy moods. She volunteered at the community bake sale, tutored younger students after school, and still found time to help her parents manage their small grocery store every weekend. She didn't complain. She didn't brag. She simply showed up and made life easier for those around her. Most people her age worried about popularity, parties, or being noticed. Angela cared about making her family proud. She dreamed of becoming a teacher one day. The kind of educator who didn't just hand out grades, but changed lives. She talked about returning to their town after college, building something meaningful for the kids who came after her. She believed in giving back before she ever had anything to give. Some classmates envied how effortlessly she excelled, but no one resented her. It's hard to resent someone who always wants others to win too. Angela celebrated her friends' successes louder than her own. She was the type of person who remembered birthdays, who checked on you after a bad day, who offered the last slice of pie even when she wanted it. The town didn't just like her. They trusted her. They admired her. They rooted for her. And that trust, that admiration, made what happened later feel like a wound no one could heal. Angela's dreams were not vague hopes. They were plans. She had already mapped out her move to New York after graduation. She wanted to work in publishing. Surrounded by manuscripts she could help shape into something unforgettable. She carried notebooks filled with ideas, lesson prompts, and unfinished essays she promised herself she'd refine someday. She cared about stories not because they were entertaining, but because she believed they could change people the way they had changed her. She often stayed late in the library, not because she needed extra time, but because she enjoyed it there. She found comfort in quiet spaces, in books older than her entire family history, in pages worn by years of curious hands. She treated libraries the way others treated places of worship, with reverence and patience. Yet she wasn't all books and ambition. She loved small joys, lemon pie, jazz records, long walks home under streetlights after late study sessions. She adored her roommate Vivian's clumsy attempts at cooking. She looked forward to phone calls with her younger brother, Owen, who always asked if she had met any famous writers yet. She told him, not yet, but one day she'd publish something worth remembering. Angela wasn't running toward success to escape her life. She wanted to grow so she could return home stronger, wiser, and useful. She believed she could lift others as she climbed. She didn't just want to succeed, she wanted to make her success mean something. People like that are rare. They leave marks wherever they go, not because they try to, but because it's impossible for them to exist any other way. Angela was one of those rare souls. Everyone could feel she was building towards something bigger, something beautiful. It was a Thursday night in late October, and the air had that sharp, crisp edge only Michigan autumn could deliver. Angela left the co-op house near campus with her familiar olive green corduroy jacket draped over her shoulders. She carried The Age of Revolution, a textbook heavier than it should have been for one so small, tucked under her arm like a talisman. Before she stepped out, she promised her roommate, Vivian, a slice of Mrs. Henderson's leftover pie waiting in the kitchen. "I'll be right back," she said, smiling as if it were an ordinary errand. It wasn't. She walked the 10-block path to her apartment slowly, appreciating the quiet street, the way the leaves crunched under her boots. Every step was familiar, every lamppost known. Her mind drifted to the manuscript she had been reviewing, to the letter she wanted to send to a professor, to the plans she was making for the winter. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing felt threatening. But that night, a dark sedan had appeared, briefly parked near the co-op. No one could say who it was or why it was there. By the time anyone noticed, it had vanished again. The streetlights cast dim halos over the sidewalk, offering little more than shadowed outlines. Angela passed them without a second thought. The world trusted her to be careful, and she trusted herself to be safe. She never made it home. Her apartment door remained locked, the bed untouched, the pie still waiting on the counter. The Age of Revolution would later be found discarded near the Huron River, its pages unturned, a silent witness to the night that stole a life too bright to be extinguished so soon. The walk home should have been ordinary. 10 blocks, a familiar route, a quiet night. But that evening, there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, almost imperceptible, the kind that only hindsight can make clear. A dark sedan lingered briefly near the co-op, its windows reflecting only the faint glow of streetlights. No one saw the driver, no one could describe a face. But the vehicle's presence, fleeting as it was, would become a detail detectives would cling to decades later. The streets were dimly lit, the trees lining Washtenaw Avenue casting elongated, restless shadows across the sidewalks. Angela moved with the confidence of someone who had walked these blocks 100 times before, but even the most familiar paths can conceal danger. A cold breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant smoke from campus chimneys, blending comfort with unease in a way that only memory can reconstruct. Her jacket hugged her shoulders, heavy with the weight of a textbook she balanced like a shield. Her promise of pie, a small human gesture, anchored her to ordinary life, to the warmth of home, the presence of friends, the quiet rhythm of youth. And yet, something untraceable stirred in the night, rushing past her awareness, unnoticed. Who would have trusted a late-night walk at that age? The question sits in the minds of everyone who hears her story. It isn't just a caution. It's a reminder of vulnerability, of the invisible moments that can change everything. Each small choice, each unremarkable step, becomes significant when fate leans in. Would you have walked alone, carrying nothing but hope and a promise? Angela did, and in that decision, her story began its tragic trajectory. A journey that would haunt Ann Arbor for decades, and eventually bring the quietest man to a public reckoning. Friday morning brought no relief. The sun rose over Ann Arbor, painting the campus in gentle light. But inside apartment 2B, something had already gone horribly wrong. Vivian Hall entered the room expecting Angela to be asleep. A pile of books strewn across the desk. A sweater tossed carelessly over the chair. Instead, the room was unnervingly perfect. The bed untouched, the covers neatly pulled. Angela's keys still hung on the hook by the door, swaying slightly as if they had been moved in anticipation of someone returning. A chill ran down Vivian's spine. She called out, her voice hesitant at first, then louder. Silence. Her heart thudded as she crossed the floor, scanning for signs of her roommate. The textbook, The Age of Revolution, nowhere in its usual spot on the desk. Pie plates stacked neatly in the kitchen, uneaten. Everything suggested a life interrupted mid-step, a routine shattered by forces unseen. Panic began its slow creep, turning small confusion into deep dread. Vivian remembered the last words Angela had said the night before: casual, bright, ordinary. She retraced the path of their evening together in her mind. A walk to get pie, a promise to be back in minutes. That promise had been broken, leaving nothing but absence as the only witness. Vivian called neighbors. No one had seen anything unusual. Phones were checked, doors knocked, corridors scoured, yet nothing concrete emerged. Only questions, only silence. That morning marked the moment certainty slipped away. The familiar comfort of routines dissolved into fear, replaced by an invisible presence, the unnerving realization that Angela Schweitzer might have vanished, and no one yet knew how or why. Detective Arthur Bellamy arrived at the apartment with a quiet, deliberate stride, his worn leather shoes tapping softly against the linoleum floor. A man of routine, he had seen missing persons before, but there was something about Angela Schweitzer's disappearance that made the air itself feel heavier. The room greeted him with stillness, as though holding its breath. The untouched bed, the keys dangling from the hook, and the absence of any other clue pressed against him like weight he could not shake. Bellamy examined the room with methodical calm, scanning every corner, every surface. His trained eyes noted details others might dismiss. A chair slightly angled, a pencil rolled to the edge of the desk, the faint scuff of shoes on the threshold. Yet none of these offered answers. Each observation deepened the mystery. Every potential lead seemed to dissolve into emptiness. He spoke softly to Vivian, gently extracting her recollection of the night before. The detective's questions were precise, careful, but underneath the composure, Bellamy felt a creeping anxiety. He had faced danger, theft, and violence. But this, a young woman simply gone, was different. No struggle, no sign, no indication, just a life interrupted, a family left waiting, a roommate grasping at fragments of memory. As he left the apartment, Bellamy felt the intangible pressure of a town unaware of the void growing in its midst. His mind mapped the streets, imagined the walk Angela had taken. He knew the first hours were critical. But here, every second counted against him. Absence was a powerful thing. It left questions where answers should have been, and forced communities to stare at the empty spaces once filled with life and laughter. He understood, in those quiet moments, that this case would demand more than routine procedures. It would demand patience, intuition, and a relentless pursuit of details no one else could see if any answers were ever to be found. The first physical evidence arrived like a whisper, subtle and almost meaningless to the untrained eye. 2 days after Angela vanished, a heavy textbook, The Age of Revolution, was discovered near the Huron River, partially hidden in a thicket. It was oddly dry, as if placed there intentionally, untouched by the rain that had fallen the night before. There were no fingerprints, no scuff marks, Nothing to suggest a struggle, just the object itself. Silent and mute, a lone witness to a night that refused to speak. Detective Bellamy pursued leads, talking to students and neighbors. They described a dark sedan, briefly seen parked near the co-op around midnight. But their accounts conflicted. Some claimed it was a Ford, others a Chevy. The driver's height, hair, and features were described inconsistently. Each interview only added more shadows to an already dark picture. Every lead fractured, leaving fragments too small to hold on to, too scattered to form a pattern. Bellamy revisited the streets Angela had walked, retraced the route, and examined every likely hideaway. Nothing. The sidewalks, the alleyways, the quiet stretches of campus, all normal, all empty. It seemed as if the world had swallowed her whole. Each failed lead was a reminder. Evidence was fragile. Truth was elusive. And sometimes, a case could exist only in the tension between what is known and what is missing. The town began to shift subtly under the weight of uncertainty. Conversations that were once casual became cautious. Students walked in groups. Neighbors kept an extra eye on streets that had always felt safe. Absence had power. It could shape fear. It could bend perception. And in this case, absence was all they had to cling to. Subscribe now so you don't miss how one overlooked object breaks this case decades later, revealing a truth no one thought possible. By the time the sun rose over Ann Arbor, the town's innocence had shifted. The disappearance of Angela Schweitzer was no longer a quiet concern confined to her apartment. Whispers spread through dorm halls, classrooms, and the local cafe where students gathered each morning. People began to notice what they had never considered before: the dimly lit streets, the brief presence of unfamiliar vehicles, the vulnerability of a life walking alone at night. Fear replaced casual trust. Suspicion shadowed everyday routines. Parents instructed their children to stay close. Neighbors questioned strangers lingering on sidewalks. And students who once roamed freely now grouped themselves together for safety. The ordinary became fraught with possibility, and the small streets Angela had walked daily now carried the weight of unseen danger. The invisible threat didn't announce itself, it simply existed, growing in the spaces where safety had once prevailed. Detective Bellamy observed the change with quiet concern. The community's collective anxiety mirrored his own. Each resident's heightened caution reinforced a simple truth. One absence, one young life stolen from the flow of ordinary days, had the power to unsettle an entire town. The patterns of life, once predictable, now felt fragile, contingent on things no one could fully control. Every shadow, every pause, every unanswered knock amplified the unknown. And yet, in this growing fear, a single object, Angela's textbook, remained overlooked. It waited silently for the moment when the right eyes would see it differently, when decades of inattention would finally give way to revelation. That object, unnoticed now, would later shatter years of uncertainty and bring answers no one had expected. The town had changed overnight. Trust was fractured, safety was questioned, and the echo of one girl's disappearance reverberated through every quiet corner. Subscribe now so you don't miss how this overlooked object becomes the key to unraveling the mystery decades later. Ann Arbor in the 1960 seconds was a city alive with energy, its streets pulsing with the footsteps of students rushing between classes, cafes, and the university library. Autumn painted the campus with fiery leaves, while laughter and debate filled lecture halls. Yet beneath the vibrant routine, there was a subtle tension. Young people moved with ambition and confidence, yet the city itself seemed to hum with unseen observation. Every corner of the campus held someone watching, whether professors grading papers, neighbors tending lawns, or students lingering after dark. Angela Schweitzer thrived in this environment. The campus was her playground and her classroom, a space where intellect and curiosity met camaraderie. She navigated its corridors with ease, chatting with peers about literature, sharing notes, and encouraging friends to pursue their dreams. And while life moved with predictable rhythm, the very density of the university culture meant that dozens of eyes could witness something or someone unusual, without the observer knowing the significance at the time. It was in this complex web of visibility that the first whispers began. Stories floated quietly through dorm rooms and coffeehouses. A dark sedan parked near the co-op at odd hours. A figure glimpsed and then gone. Small inconsistencies in the retelling of mundane moments. People noticed, and then forgot, brushed aside minor disturbances as ordinary urban life. The city had become a lattice of potential clues, each observer holding a piece of a puzzle that would not fully reveal itself for decades. In this world of constant motion, the ordinary collided with the extraordinary. The city that watched also concealed, and the eyes that seemed omnipresent failed to capture the one act that would haunt the streets for years to come. In Ann Arbor, everyone was a witness, and no one had the full picture. The whispers began quietly, almost innocuously, in dorm rooms and campus cafes. Students spoke of a dark sedan seen near the co-op on the night Angela vanished, but no two accounts matched. Some described it as a two-door Ford, others insisted it was a Chevy. The driver's height, hair, and even posture varied between witnesses. Each retelling added confusion, and with every conversation, the story shifted, like smoke caught in the wind. Rumors spread faster than facts. A student swore they had seen a man leaning against the vehicle, while another insisted the car had idled empty for 10 minutes before vanishing. Small details, a turn of the wheel, the flash of a license plate became magnified in memory, as if people needed certainty in a situation that offered none. The city's students, once carefree and self-assured, found themselves questioning every shadow, every vehicle that passed too slowly, every stranger walking the quiet streets at night. The conflicting reports weighed on Detective Bellamy. He combed through interviews repeatedly, trying to extract consistency where none existed. Each contradiction fueled the sense that the city itself was conspiring to hide the truth. Friends argued over what they had truly seen. Neighbors second-guessed their memories, and students began walking in groups, hesitant to trust the streets they had long known. Ann Arbor was changing, its energy tinged with fear. The ordinary buzz of a college town, debates, coffee, laughter, now carried a thread of tension. People wondered who could be lurking, who could be waiting, and what small misstep might turn routine into tragedy. Each rumor, no matter how unreliable, seemed to carry weight, and Bellamy knew that somewhere within this chaos lay the truth. Somewhere, hidden in the contradictions, was the first thread that might unravel a decades-old disappearance. Detective Arthur Bellamy found himself drawn deeper into the mystery, the case slipping from a routine investigation into something far more personal. Each morning, he retraced Angela's steps in his mind, pacing the street she had walked, replaying witness statements, scrutinizing every detail that might have seemed insignificant at the time. The dark sedan, the discarded textbook, the 10-block route all became a map in his consciousness, a grid he could not leave behind. Sleep offered little respite. At night, Bellamy reviewed notes by the dim glow of his desk lamp, photographs of the apartment, sketches of streets, and lists of names. The unanswered questions gnawed at him. He began to see patterns in shadows, inconsistencies in stories, small glances or gestures that hinted at knowledge people refused to share. The case was no longer just about Angela. It was about justice, closure, and the haunting awareness that time alone could not erase wrongdoing. Friends noticed his absence. Colleagues whispered about his obsession, but Bellamy barely registered it. He believed that the truth was patient, waiting to be coaxed from silence. Every street corner held potential evidence. Every casual remark could hide a clue, and the city itself seemed to whisper in subtle ways he alone could interpret. His obsession was not reckless. It was a steady, methodical pressure applied against the wall of mystery that had imprisoned Angela's story for too long. And yet, the more he pressed, the more the case seemed to push back. No arrests, no confessions, no bodies, just silence. Bellamy understood, perhaps better than anyone, that obsession could either illuminate or consume. Each day he returned to the city streets with the same determination, the same quiet dread, believing that eventually, The persistent eye would uncover the truth hidden among contradictions, shadows, and fear. As the investigation dragged on, a rumor surfaced that would shake even Detective Bellamy. A theory whispered in tight circles suggested that someone close to the university, a student or young staff member, might be involved. It was audacious, almost unthinkable to accuse someone within the community of causing Angela's disappearance. Yet, the suggestion spread, carried by fear and speculation, gaining weight with every retelling. Bellamy confronted the theory cautiously. He could not ignore it, nor could he act on it without evidence. Still, the mere idea that someone trusted, someone respected, could be capable of such a hidden act rattled the framework of the town's certainty. Conversations that once revolved around normal student life now carried undercurrents of suspicion. Neighbors glanced at one another, professors noted absences differently, and students began reconsidering the faces they passed daily. The city's confidence in its own safety had fractured. The bold accusation, though unproven, had an undeniable effect. Bellamy revisited every detail with sharper eyes, considering people he had previously dismissed, questioning motives he had never thought to explore. Every dark sedan sighting, every contradictory witness statement, every unexplained movement, suddenly required renewed scrutiny. Nothing could be taken at face value. In Ann Arbor, anyone might hold a secret, and the once familiar streets now felt lined with hidden truths. The tension spread beyond the detective's mind. The university, the town, even casual visitors felt the shift. Fear was no longer private. It was collective. Every ordinary action was now measured against an unspoken question. Who could have done this? And how long had the city overlooked them? The whispers, the glances, and the questions formed a network of doubt, tension, and heightened attention, setting the stage for the eventual breakthrough that would emerge decades later. 2 days after Angela Schweitzer vanished, a solitary object appeared along the banks of the Huron River. The Age of Revolution, her heavy literature textbook, rested half-hidden in a thicket. Oddly, it was dry, as if someone had deliberately shielded it from rain. The cover was scuffed in places, but otherwise, it looked intact, ordinary in a way that contrasted sharply with the chaos of Angela's disappearance. Detective Bellamy was the first to examine it. He picked it up with gloved hands, turning it over, searching for fingerprints, marks, anything that might explain why it had been left there. And yet, the textbook revealed almost nothing. No scuffs of a struggle. No personal belongings tucked inside it. Was a quiet, stubborn witness to a night that had been erased from memory. Neighbors and students passing by barely noticed the object. To them, it was just a book. To Bellamy, it was a sign that the missing pieces of the night might exist somewhere, if only someone could interpret them correctly. He made a note of its location, its orientation, and even the angle at which it had settled against the brush. At the time, the discovery offered hope, but hope quickly became frustration. The textbook, though tangible, provided no breakthrough. Its odd cleanliness puzzled him. How had it avoided weather and decay? How had it remained untouched for 2 days in a public, exposed location? Even now, decades later, the textbook stands as a symbol, a single object, overlooked, ignored, and underestimated, yet containing the first thread of truth. One small detail buried in plain sight would eventually become the key that shattered decades of silence. Among Bellamy's careful notes from that first examination, one entry stood out in hindsight, faint, almost imperceptible. A trace of red clay on the inside cover of Angela's textbook. At the time, it seemed inconsequential, dismissed as ordinary environmental residue. The detective jotted it down, moved on, and continued the laborious process of interviewing witnesses and tracing Angela's final steps. No one could have guessed that this tiny speck, nearly invisible to the naked eye, would one day hold the weight of decades of unanswered questions. The clay was subtle, easily overlooked by anyone who didn't know its significance. Bellamy himself did not fully grasp its potential. He focused on what he could see: the dark sedan reports, the conflicting witness statements, The streets Angela had walked alone. Yet, quietly, that red dust lingered as a silent signature, a remnant of the night no one else had noticed. As weeks turned to months, the importance of that note faded further. Investigators cycled through the case files, each new officer and detective drawn to the glaring absence of leads rather than the microscopic clue lying in plain sight. The red clay was catalogued, recorded, but ignored a detail stored in a folder alongside hundreds of pages that yielded nothing conclusive. It would be decades before anyone returned to this small, almost trivial observation. That overlooked trace, unremarkable in 1966, would later become the linchpin connecting Angela's disappearance to a location, and ultimately, to the person who had hidden the truth for more than 50 years. Comment below. Mistake or intentional cover-up? Could such a small detail have changed everything if it had been examined differently back then? Despite the discovery of the textbook and Bellamy's faint note about the red clay, the investigation began to stall. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and no new leads emerged. Witnesses' memories conflicted. Evidence yielded nothing tangible, and the streets Angela had walked became just another map of dead ends. The urgency that marked the first days of the search slowly dulled into frustration and exhaustion. Detective Bellamy revisited the files again and again, retracing the 10-block route Angela had taken on that final night. Each review offered the same frustrating reality. Nothing concrete to pursue. Nothing to tie a person to the disappearance. The city's ordinary rhythms continued around him, oblivious to the quiet despair that now hung over the case. Every unanswered question weighed on Bellamy, a constant reminder that a life had been erased without leaving a trace. The textbook lay in evidence, catalogued and untouched, while the faint red clay remained a minor notation in a folder of mounting dead ends. For the town, Angela's disappearance was a growing wound, and for the detective, it became an obsession with no resolution in sight. Friends and colleagues offered sympathy but could not understand the grip the case held on his mind. Bellamy's careful pursuit of justice met only silence. The city's streets, once familiar and safe, seemed more uncertain. Every dark sedan reported became a possible connection. Every shadow along the sidewalks, a potential witness to something missed. Ann Arbor, vibrant and alive during the day, carried a quiet tension in its evenings. A sense that the missing girl had left behind fragments of herself that no one yet knew how to read. Subscribe so you don't miss how one small, overlooked clue eventually shatters decades of silence and brings the truth to light. As the months turned into years, Angela Schweitzer's disappearance became a lingering question mark over Ann Arbor. The textbook, once briefly a symbol of hope, was now a reminder of what had been missed. That tiny speck of red clay, catalogued and forgotten, sat quietly in the evidence room, waiting for technology and insight that had yet to arrive. The city moved on. Students graduated. Streets were renovated. But the question remained. What might have been uncovered if even one investigator had looked closer? Detective Bellamy carried the weight of unanswered questions with him. Each October, when leaves fell along Washtenaw Avenue, he would revisit the case in his mind. How had no one connected the seemingly trivial clay to the construction sites nearby? Could a fresh set of eyes or modern tools have revealed the truth years earlier? The frustration was tangible, a reminder that justice delayed often becomes justice denied. Community whispers reflected the same doubts. Residents debated quietly, some insisting mistakes were made, others wondering if there had been intentional oversights. Every discussion, every casual remark in coffee shops or dormitories returned to the same haunting question. Could Angela's fate have been prevented, or had the pieces always been hidden in plain sight? And yet, for all the uncertainty, the forgotten clue held promise. It was proof that even the smallest, most ignored detail could change everything. The red clay, nearly invisible and dismissed for decades, would eventually guide investigators to answers that no one could have predicted in 1966. Comment below. Mistake or intentional cover-up? Could a single overlooked detail have rewritten the story of Angela Schweitzer's disappearance, or was the truth always destined to wait for someone willing to see what others could not? Detective Arthur Bellamy retired in 1988. But retirement did little to quiet the relentless pulse of the Angela Schweitzer case. Each October, like a clockwork ritual, he returned to the files that had long since yellowed, poring over witness statements, maps, and the small note about the red clay on her textbook. Time had not dulled the questions, nor had it softened the weight of failure. Friends and family urged him to let go, to accept that some mysteries remain unsolved. Bellamy could not. The 10-block walk Angela had taken, the dark sedan, the discarded textbook, every detail haunted him. Each unexplained absence, every contradiction in witness accounts, lingered in his mind, refusing closure. He walked the streets he had once patrolled, often retracing Angela's final steps, as if his presence alone might conjure the answers that had eluded him for decades. He carried the burden quietly. Colleagues noticed the way he lingered on old cases, the way he could recount minute details from half a century prior, with exact precision. Bellamy's life became intertwined with a disappearance that had never truly ended. Each year brought a reminder. The city moved on. People forgot. But the unanswered questions remained. Embedded in every corner of Ann Arbor, he had once believed to be safe. The case was no longer just a professional challenge. It was a shadow that shaped Bellamy's existence, a constant companion that blurred the line between duty and obsession. For him, the Schweitzer case was a living thing, one that demanded attention, demanded justice, and refused to rest. Every folder, every note, every faint trace of evidence was a reminder that the world could be both ordinary and cruel, often in the same heartbeat. Owen Schweitzer was 16 when his sister vanished. That night, and every night since, he carried the absence with him, a hollow echo that never faded. While the town tried to move on, Owen held on to memory as a lifeline. His sister's bedroom remained untouched for months, her favorite books carefully shelved, the small trinkets she loved displayed like fragile proof that she had existed, that she mattered. As the years passed, Owen became the living archive of Angela's life. He maintained a discreet memorial in his home, candles lit on anniversaries, photographs preserved, letters written and stored away. Each act was quiet but deliberate, a ritual of remembrance, a refusal to let time erase her. In college, at work, even in his own family, he became a bridge between the past and the present, ensuring that Angela's story was never allowed to slip into oblivion. He corresponded regularly with the Ann Arbor Police Department, sending inquiries, small leads, or notes of hope. Each letter was a pulse, a reminder that Angela had a place in the world even if she was missing from it. Friends and neighbors watched him with curiosity, some offering support, others remaining distant, wary of reopening wounds they did not fully understand. But Owen's dedication never wavered. He was a symbol of endurance, a quiet force against the eroding effects of time. Through his vigilance, Angela's presence remained tangible, woven into the community's consciousness. Even as decades passed and streets changed, his commitment to her memory preserved the humanity behind the cold facts of a case that had gone unsolved. Owen's unwavering attention was a reminder. The weight of absence can define a lifetime, but so too can the determination to honor what was lost. As the years rolled on, Ann Arbor transformed. Streets once lined with familiar shops and quiet houses gave way to construction and expansion. The University of Michigan grew, new wings and facilities rising over areas where old memories lingered. Foundations were poured, sidewalks replaced, and the landscape itself began to obscure the past. Every renovation, every layer of concrete, buried pieces of the night Angela disappeared, making the past physically more distant, more difficult to access. Yet the changes did nothing to erase the mystery. While buildings and streets altered the city's appearance, they could not erase the questions, the rumors, or the lingering unease. Students still whispered about the Ann Arbor ghost, about the girl who had vanished along the familiar pathways. Neighborhoods carried subtle echoes of that night, a silent reminder that the city's progress had not erased its shadows. Detective Bellamy, even in retirement, watched these changes with a careful eye. New constructions meant new possibilities. Perhaps a detail overlooked in 1966 was now buried, yet potentially recoverable. Every crane, every excavation, every paved-over alley became a subtle connection to what had once been. The city itself, in its ceaseless evolution, held clues that the human eye could not always see, waiting for someone persistent enough to uncover them. For Owen Schweitzer, each new building was bittersweet. Progress moved forward, yet the physical markers of his sister's final night were being erased. The city was alive, bustling, full of promise, and yet, in quiet corners and under layers of concrete, Angela's story waited. Buried, but not forgotten. The mystery remained, locked in time, as the world around it continued, unaware that the answers rested beneath its own shifting foundations. Decades passed. Each year stretched the distance between Angela Schweitzer's disappearance and the hope of resolution. For the Schweitzer family, every day was a quiet torment, a constant negotiation with uncertainty. Owen carried the weight of unanswered questions, his life defined as much by what was missing as by what remained. Each anniversary, each fleeting memory, reminded him that justice was delayed. And yet, his dedication never faltered. Detective Bellamy, now aged and worn, lived with the same unrelenting tension. Retirement offered no release. Files once stacked neatly on his desk were now fragile relics, yellowed with age, containing the faintest traces of evidence that could have solved the case decades earlier. Each document, each note, reminded him of the small details that had been overlooked. The clay, the textbook, the fleeting glimpse of a dark sedan, they were silent witnesses, patient and waiting for someone capable of listening. The city moved on. Streets transformed, buildings rose, and a new generation of students walked paths Angela once traveled. And yet, in quiet corners, in conversations hushed over dinner tables or dormitory halls, her story endured. The absence she left shaped the community in subtle ways, a reminder of vigilance, of fragility, and of the invisible threads that connect lives across time. For those who followed the case, the decades of waiting held a lesson, that persistence matters, that even the smallest, most ignored clue may hold the key to truth. And for viewers who want to see justice unfold, the journey does not end with fleeting headlines. It requires attention, patience, and presence. Only subscribers follow cases this far to find justice, to witness how time and tenacity finally align to uncover answers that decades of silence could not conceal. Detective Miles Jensen arrived at the Ann Arbor Police Department's Cold Case Unit in 2018, with a reputation for seeing what others overlooked. Young, methodical, and deeply analytical, Jensen approached investigations with a technological lens, blending modern tools with patient observation. While many of his colleagues relied on intuition or experience, he depended on data, patterns, and precision, believing that even the smallest detail could break open the oldest cases. The Schweitzer file landed on his desk like a ghost of the past. Angela Schweitzer had disappeared in 1966, leaving behind little more than a textbook, a few witness statements, and decades of unanswered questions. To most, the case was a relic, a cold file with minimal chance of resolution. To Jensen, however, it was an invitation. He treated the evidence not as static, but as a set of signals waiting to be decoded. Every page of Bellamy's meticulous notes drew his attention. He scanned the documents, noting patterns, timelines, and inconsistencies, but one minor annotation immediately arrested his focus: the mention of faint red clay on the inside cover of Angela's textbook. Most officers had ignored it, dismissed it as environmental debris, unworthy of further investigation. Jensen saw differently. He recognized the potential in what had been overlooked for 52 years. That tiny detail could be the key to unraveling decades of silence, provided it was approached with the right expertise. The young detective's mind raced with possibilities. He imagined modern methods, forensic geology, DNA recovery techniques, and digital mapping could finally breathe life into a file that had long been dormant. Here was a detail that, properly examined, might connect a seemingly ordinary object to a location, a person, and a long-hidden truth. For Jensen, this was not just a case. It was a challenge waiting to be met with clarity, patience, and innovation. As Jensen combed through the Schweitzer files, his eyes returned repeatedly to a small, almost invisible annotation. Faint red clay on the inside cover of Angela's textbook. A trivial note to some, overlooked for decades. It struck Jensen as significant. His experience had taught him that environmental traces often spoke louder than witness statements, and a microscopic fragment of Earth could tell a story spanning miles and decades. The detective paused, considering the geography of Ann Arbor in 1966. Construction sites, excavation areas, riverbanks, each location carried its own geological signature. If the clay could be traced, it might pinpoint where Angela had been in her final moments. The idea electrified Jensen, turning the decades-old silence into a puzzle begging for modern insight. He pulled out the textbook, handling it with care. Under bright examination lights, the faint, reddish dust appeared almost ethereal, a whisper of the past preserved in the fibers. Unlike other debris collected over the years, this layer had not been disturbed, nor had it weathered like the surrounding evidence. It was as if the earth itself had waited patiently for someone capable of reading its message. Jensen's mind raced with strategy. This was not about rushing to conclusions or forcing a narrative. It was about methodically testing what the past had left behind. The clay had survived decades, hidden yet intact, offering a tangible connection between Angela's last known movements and a place that had been erased from memory. For the first time in over 50 years, the Schweitzer case felt like a living investigation again. A case with a path forward. A trail that had never truly gone cold, only dormant. He knew the next step would be critical. Extracting meaning from the clay itself. That decision would mark the beginning of the breakthrough, the moment when science would finally confront silence. Detective Jensen carefully packaged the tiny sample of red clay, understanding its potential weight. To most, it was just dirt, an unremarkable fragment collected half a century ago. To him, it was a message from the past, one that had waited patiently for the right interpreter. With a clear purpose, he sent it to a specialized forensic geology lab in Illinois, a place equipped to analyze even the most minute particles with extraordinary precision. The lab's task was straightforward in theory: determine the origin of the clay. But in practice, it demanded state-of-the-art equipment, careful testing, and cross-referencing with decades-old geological maps. The composition, trace minerals, and minute variations could reveal more than a location. It could tie an object to a single construction site, a single stretch of land, and perhaps even a specific individual. Jensen's intuition was clear. Somewhere within this microscopic dust lay the first real clue in 52 years. Sending the sample was both a leap of faith and a calculated strategy. He understood that decades of stagnation could not mask the truth forever. While the city had evolved, while streets had changed and buildings had risen, the earth beneath still held the secret. Jensen's approach combined patience and technology, a deliberate effort to allow modern science to illuminate a path that human memory alone could no longer reveal. Even at this early stage, hope sparked. The Schweitzer case, long dormant, had been handed a voice through the tiniest particles of matter. Jensen understood that breakthroughs often came from the smallest anomalies, details dismissed or overlooked. In the red clay, he saw not just dirt, but the beginning of resolution, the first tangible connection bridging the decades between Angela's disappearance and the possibility of justice. 18 months passed. The lab's analysis was painstaking, each day stretching the tension tighter. Then, finally, the results arrived, and they were electrifying. The red clay was no ordinary soil. Its mineral composition, a rare mixture of gypsum and crushed limestone, existed only in a few locations within Ann Arbor during the mid-1960s. For the first time, a tangible link emerged between the textbook and a real, specific place: the excavation site for the University of Michigan Law Library Wing. Jensen's pulse quickened as he cross-referenced the location with historical records, construction logs, and personnel files from the era. Who had legitimate access to that site? Which individuals could have been present at the exact time Angela had vanished? The detective's mind raced, assembling the puzzle piece by piece, fueled by decades of silence that now seemed surmountable. He knew the significance immediately. This was not speculation, not a vague hint. It was a scientific footprint, precise and actionable. The smallest particle of clay, overlooked for 52 years, had become the thread leading into a web of people, places, and choices. A single piece of evidence was now capable of breaking open the case. In that moment, Jensen understood the gravity of patience, diligence, and modern science. What had remained hidden for over half a century had finally spoken, and while the breakthrough was only the beginning, it marked the first real shift in a case defined by absence, frustration, and longing for truth. The path to Angela Schweitzer's story, once buried in silence, was now illuminated. The forensic lab report arrived with results that demanded attention. The red clay on Angela's textbook was unlike any other soil in Ann Arbor. Its mineral composition, a rare mixture of gypsum and crushed limestone, existed in only a handful of locations during the mid-1960 seconds. For Detective Miles Jensen, the implications were immediate. This clay was a fingerprint of the earth itself, pointing to one construction site with undeniable specificity, the foundation excavation for the University of Michigan Law Library wing. Every detail mattered. The clay's unique combination could not have been random. It required a presence at that precise site, during the narrow window when Angela had disappeared. No other place in the city matched the chemical signature, narrowing possibilities with a precision unimaginable in 1966. The city, with its decades of growth and concrete overlay, had hidden the site from view, but the soil had preserved the secret. Jensen's mind shifted quickly from analysis to strategy. The earth had spoken, but it required careful interpretation. He began compiling a list of everyone who had legitimate access to the site during that period: construction workers, maintenance crews, security personnel, and student assistants. Each name became a potential key to unlocking a silence that had lasted more than 50 years. The quiet hum of the office was replaced by a tension Jensen had not felt in any other case. A single particle of clay, ignored by generations of investigators, had become a guide. What had once been a cold, dormant file now pulsed with direction and possibility. It was no longer just a piece of evidence. It was the first tangible line leading from absence to accountability. The breakthrough was unmistakable. The ground itself had become the witness no one had asked to listen to until now. With the construction site identified, Jensen began cross-referencing the list of personnel who had access during the critical weeks of 1966. Each name represented a potential connection, a possible thread linking Angela Schweitzer's final steps to the unseen hand that had intercepted them. But the breakthrough required more than access. It demanded alignment with the remaining details, the fragmentary witness statements, and the faint recollections of students who had seen a dark-colored sedan near the co-op that night. Every entry on the roster became a point of investigation. Jensen carefully reviewed employment records, vehicle registrations, and patterns of movement. Who owned a car matching the description from half a century ago? Which individuals had both opportunity and proximity? The process was painstaking, but the payoff would be decisive. One by one, names were eliminated, leaving only those whose presence and means coincided with the elusive shadow of that night. The list shrank quickly, each step increasing the pressure. What had remained invisible for decades was now sharply in focus. A seemingly ordinary maintenance worker, a student paying tuition with part-time labor, emerged as more than a historical footnote. The alignment of access, vehicle, and presence formed a profile that could no longer be ignored. Jensen realized he was standing at the edge of a revelation. A single name, previously indistinct in a sea of records, was beginning to dominate the investigation. For the first time since Angela's disappearance, The investigation held the promise of a tangible target. The soil had guided them to the construction site, and the records had guided them to the man whose life had, for decades, hidden a truth no one expected. The tension in the office grew with every cross-checked file. The silent earth and the meticulous detective had finally begun to converge. After days of cross-referencing, one name emerged with unmistakable clarity. Leonard "Lenny" Thorne. The details aligned with a precision that left little room for doubt. Thorne, a 21-year-old history student in 1966, had been working a maintenance job on campus, a position that granted him access to the law library construction site during the weeks surrounding Angela's disappearance. He owned a dark blue, two-door Ford Fairlane, the type described by multiple witnesses who had seen a sedan lingering near the co-op that night. The revelation hit like a jolt. Jensen leaned back, letting the weight of the discovery settle. 52 years of uncertainty, of false leads and dead ends, had finally converged on a single individual. The man had been ordinary in appearance, almost invisible in the grand narrative of the university. Yet the alignment of facts now made him extraordinary in the most chilling sense. Jensen reviewed every fragment of historical documentation. Thorne's access, his vehicle, and his presence on campus created a mosaic of opportunity that could not be ignored. The pieces, ignored or invisible to investigators in 1966, now fit together with the clarity granted by time, technology, and persistence. The detective's pulse quickened, knowing that this single name was more than a suspect. It was the breakthrough the Schweitzer case had waited for over half a century. The realization carried a second weight. Thorne's life did not end in obscurity. He had built decades of reputation, woven into the community as a respected figure, a pillar of society. The contrast between his public persona and the shadow emerging from his past intensified the horror. The soil had spoken, the records had converged, and Leonard Thorne now stood at the center of a story that had been silent for 52 years. Leonard Thorne was no stranger to respect. Over the decades, he had become a fixture in Ann Arbor, a high school principal, a volunteer, a neighbor whose meticulous care of his property and consistent kindness earned admiration from those around him. To many, he was a trusted authority, someone who shaped young lives and contributed meaningfully to the community. He was, in every visible sense, the opposite of the danger that had haunted Angela Schweitzer's story for 52 years. And yet, beneath that facade, the red clay and the records now pointed unflinchingly to him. Jensen reviewed the evidence with methodical patience, knowing that the contrast between Thorne's public life and his hidden past would shock even the most seasoned investigators. Here was a man whose identity had been carefully constructed over decades, yet whose actions, long concealed, were finally illuminated by a tiny fragment of soil and the alignment of forgotten details. The revelation raised questions that rippled far beyond the investigation. How could someone trusted by so many carry such a secret? Who had unknowingly respected a man capable of unthinkable violence? And the most pressing question of all, should someone who had lived a lifetime of esteem retain any benefit of doubt in the face of overwhelming evidence? Jensen knew the answer rested not in moral debate but in the concrete facts of forensic science. The detective's mind moved swiftly to next steps, planning discreet surveillance, gathering historical corroboration, and preparing for a confrontation that would unsettle not only Thorne but the entire community. Every calculated decision reflected the gravity of the moment. Decades of appearances, decades of silence, converging now in a single point of accountability. As word of the investigation quietly spread within the department, the tension was palpable. The soil had guided them to a man who had become a pillar of the community, and now that very stature amplified the shock of what had been uncovered. The Schweitzer case, once a distant, frozen chapter, was on the brink of exposure, and the world was about to confront the duality of Leonard Thorne. Leonard Thorne's career as a school principal was, by all appearances, exemplary. For decades, he guided students through the challenges of adolescence with patience, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to their development. Teachers praised his fairness, noting how he balanced authority with encouragement, inspiring both respect and trust. Parents felt reassured, confident that their children were in capable hands, and students recalled the calm, approachable presence of a principal who seemed genuinely invested in their futures. Beyond the walls of the school, Thorne cultivated a life that mirrored his professional image. He volunteered at community events, organized local book drives, and maintained his property with care that neighbors admired. Awards and recognitions for educational achievement and community involvement lined his home office, each accolade reinforcing the impression of a man dedicated to service. To those around him, he was a figure who embodied stability, responsibility, and moral integrity. Yet the very routines that earned Thorne admiration also provided him with proximity and influence, granting access to spaces and individuals that few questioned. Hallways, classrooms, extracurricular events, each became a controlled environment in which he moved with confidence and authority. The consistency of his presence reinforced the belief in his character. No one suspected that a life so public and respectable could conceal a secret decades in the making. Detective Jensen understood the weight of this dichotomy. The man who had inspired generations of students, who had woven himself into the fabric of a community, was now at the center of an investigation that challenged every assumption of safety and trust. The history of respect, once a shield, now stood in stark contrast to the emerging truth, leaving the question of character and consequence hanging over every memory of Leonard Thorne. Neighbors recalled Leonard Thorne as the man who kept his lawn immaculate, always stopping to greet passers-by with a polite nod or a warm smile. He was the first to volunteer for local initiatives, whether it was organizing book drives or helping at charity events. Children remembered him as approachable, someone who listened patiently and offered guidance when they felt lost. Adults trusted him instinctively. His reputation was untouchable, cemented over decades of visible service and daily presence. Former students described him as a mentor who could balance discipline with encouragement. They spoke of assemblies where he emphasized ethics, dedication, and responsibility, never knowing that the principles he preached had existed alongside a hidden darkness. Parents entrusted him with their most valuable concern, their children, without hesitation. The town's faith in Thorne was total, a silent agreement that this man, this smiling figure, was a foundation of their community. Even colleagues praised his consistency, noting how he maintained calm during crises, mediated conflicts with fairness, and remained committed to the school's success. Professional achievements only added layers to the admiration, making him a figure whose judgment and presence seemed beyond reproach. Over the years, his reputation became a protective barrier, one that masked any suspicion and discouraged scrutiny. This admiration, while genuine and heartfelt, created a chilling irony. The very trust that made Thorne respected also rendered his past actions invisible for decades. Detective Jensen recognized the paradox. A life lived openly, full of commendable deeds, standing side by side with a hidden chapter of violence. The duality was stark and haunting. In a town where Leonard Thorne was revered, the ground had quietly waited for justice to catch up. And now, that reckoning was finally beginning. Leonard Thorne's daily routine placed him in constant proximity to the most vulnerable. Students navigating adolescence, young adults seeking guidance, and staff who relied on his authority. Classrooms, hallways, and extracurricular spaces became his territory, each moment granting him oversight and control. What seemed like dedication and presence was, in retrospect, a pattern of access that no one questioned, a subtle framework that allowed him to move unobserved when opportunity arose. School assemblies, late-night meetings, and after-school programs created repeated occasions where Thorne could interact with individuals away from casual scrutiny. His reputation as a mentor meant that colleagues and parents accepted his presence unquestioningly. His authority was rarely challenged, and his access was comprehensive, blending seamlessly with routine responsibilities. The hallways that echoed with student chatter also carried the quiet certainty that he could operate without detection. Detective Jensen understood the gravity of this revelation. Thorne's public life was not just a cover. It was a mechanism that shielded decades of hidden truths. The very characteristics that had earned him respect, consistency, reliability, and meticulous engagement with the school were now seen in a darker context. They enabled a life lived with secrets deeply buried. For investigators, the contrast between opportunity and appearance was striking. Access that had been ordinary and mundane had become evidence of calculated concealment. The subtle tension between admiration and suspicion intensified. Each memory of Thorne's helpfulness, every story of his guidance, now carried the weight of doubt. Students, colleagues, and neighbors, who had once felt safe in his presence, became part of a narrative they could not have anticipated. The hidden access, the quiet authority, the freedom to move unobserved, all these elements now formed a critical part of the investigation, revealing how someone who appeared so upright could have eluded detection for over 50 years. The deeper Detective Jensen dug, the more the contrast between Leonard Thorne's public persona and the truth of his past became unbearable. Here was a man celebrated for decades as a pillar of the community, a mentor who inspired trust, and a figure of unwavering respect, yet beneath the surface of admiration lay a secret that had taken 55 years to uncover. Every accolade, every commendation, every story of his kindness now stood in stark opposition to the evidence converging around him. Former students recounted how Thorne had guided them through academic and personal challenges, unaware that the very access they praised had once been used to commit an unthinkable act. Neighbors' stories of his generosity and reliability, helping carry groceries, organizing community events, painted a picture of virtue. The town, in its collective memory, had constructed an image of Thorne as a man beyond reproach. That image had protected him, even as the past remained silent. For Detective Jensen, the challenge was both technical and emotional. The evidence read clay linking Thorne to the construction site, his vehicle matching witness descriptions, and decades-old personnel records had to speak louder than the decades of trust he had accumulated. And yet, the paradox of Thorne's life added weight to the case. How could a community reconcile the man they loved and admired with the crimes hidden for more than half a century? The contrast was jarring, almost surreal. The smiles, the accolades, the public image of unwavering integrity, all now existed alongside a dark, suppressed truth. It forced the town and anyone following the case to confront a disquieting reality. Appearances can be deceiving, and the most trusted individuals may hide the deepest secrets. The dichotomy left a haunting question. Can decades of respect erase a lifetime of guilt? In the quiet of the investigation room, Jensen reflected on this duality. Leonard Thorne, the respected principal, and Leonard Thorne, the man responsible for Angela Schweitzer's death, were now inseparable in the record of history. The town's faith, the admiration of generations, and the hidden access he had wielded all collided, setting the stage for the reckoning that had been decades in the making. Detective Miles Jensen understood that every detail mattered, and in this case, decades of silence had narrowed the window for discovery to the smallest fragments of evidence. Leonard Thorne had lived 55 years of unquestioned respectability, moving among students, neighbors, and colleagues without ever betraying his hidden past. To finally confront the truth, Jensen had to collect DNA without alerting Thorne to the investigation, a delicate task requiring precision, patience, and discretion. The opportunity came at a community event, a book donation drive where Thorne had volunteered countless times. Surrounded by supporters and admirers, he moved with the same calm, composed demeanor that had earned him admiration for decades. While his focus was on shelving books and speaking with children, Jensen and his team quietly obtained a discarded coffee cup. Every movement was calculated to avoid suspicion. The smallest hint of observation could have shattered the chance to secure irrefutable evidence. The collection of a single saliva sample might have seemed insignificant, yet Jensen knew its importance. That one cup, abandoned for a brief moment, contained what science could now extract with precision: a fragment of Thorne's biological identity, preserved in the molecules of DNA. It was a link across half a century, bridging the gap between a crime that had frozen time and the technological tools capable of revealing the truth. In that moment, the detective felt the gravity of the breakthrough. Years of frustration, decades of unanswered questions, and the weight of Angela Schweitzer's disappearance now converged on a single, silent object. The cup was ordinary, unremarkable, yet it held the key to exposing a hidden life, a quiet reckoning, and a community about to confront the unimaginable. The next step in Detective Jensen's breakthrough came with a quiet intensity. 55 years earlier, Angela Schweitzer's olive green corduroy jacket had been recovered, a mundane piece of clothing that had held more than warmth. It contained the faint trace of a human life intersected with tragedy. Hidden in its folds, deep within the creases, were degraded skin cells, fragments so small that, in 1966, no technology could have made sense of them. They had waited, silent and overlooked, until now. In the controlled environment of the forensic laboratory, Jensen's team prepared the samples with meticulous care. The coffee cup provided a fresh, uncontaminated source of Thorne's DNA. The degraded material from Angela's jacket, fragile and fragmented, demanded patience, precision, and cutting-edge methods to extract any usable genetic profile. It was a delicate balance, preserving the integrity of decades-old evidence, while allowing modern science to speak clearly. As the analyses progressed, the two strands of evidence, the saliva from the cup and the minute skin cells from the jacket, were carefully compared. The tension in the room was palpable, though Jensen maintained his composure. This was the moment when suspicion would either crystallize into certainty or dissolve back into ambiguity. Every second stretched, every instrument hum carried the weight of years of unanswered questions and lives overshadowed by doubt. Finally, the match became clear. The DNA from Thorne's discarded cup corresponded precisely to the material on Angela's jacket. What had once been invisible, inconclusive, and frustratingly silent now spoke with undeniable clarity. The past, locked away for more than half a century, had left a trace that could not be erased. Science had remembered what the world had forgotten, and the invisible thread connecting perpetrator to victim had finally been revealed. The results of the DNA comparison carried a weight that words alone could not capture. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. Leonard Thorne, the man who had spent decades as a trusted principal, neighbor, and volunteer, was now irrevocably linked to Angela Schweitzer's disappearance. The match was absolute, a silent testament written in molecules, unalterable and definitive. Detective Jensen reflected on the power of this proof. For 55 years, Angela's case had been a void, a name, a jacket, a textbook, and a community left unsettled. All previous efforts, from interviews to witness accounts, had hit dead ends. Yet now, in a single forensic analysis, the evidence spoke louder than memory, rumor, or reputation. Science had bypassed human error and hesitation. It demanded acknowledgement. The room was quiet as the team processed the magnitude of what had just been confirmed. This was not a theatrical confession or a coerced admission. It was the impartial, irrefutable voice of DNA itself. The fragments of skin cells, once considered useless remnants, had finally been understood. In those silent sequences lay decades of truth, now forcing a reckoning for a man whose life had seemed untouchable. Jensen knew the evidence could not be ignored. The match bridged generations. Angela's family, who had waited decades for answers, and the community, whose faith in one of its pillars had been absolute, were now confronting a reality long buried. The DNA didn't just implicate Thorne. It validated every fear, every unanswered question, every lingering doubt about that cold October night in 1966. This was the moment where the invisible became visible. The proof did not scream, it did not plead, it simply existed, undeniable and unyielding. The past had left its mark, and justice, long delayed, was finally positioned to follow. The discovery of the DNA match did more than identify a suspect. It reshaped the narrative of 55 years of unanswered questions. Science had bridged the divide between decades of silence and the long overdue truth. Detective Jensen understood the magnitude. What had once been inaccessible to human observation, overlooked in the chaos of a missing person case, was now illuminated by the impartial precision of modern technology. For Owen Schweitzer, Angela's brother, The revelation was more than procedural. It was emotional, cathartic, and devastating all at once. The DNA confirmed what he had long feared, but dared not fully accept. The person responsible for his sister's disappearance had lived openly, celebrated by the very community that had mourned her absence. For him, the proof was both a key and a hammer. It unlocked closure while shattering illusions of trust. The forensic breakthrough also served as a powerful reminder to the wider public. Technology can preserve truth long after memories fade, after witnesses pass away, and after time buries the visible traces of crime. Small, overlooked fragments, a skin cell, a discarded cup, particles of clay can speak across decades, holding perpetrators accountable, even when the world has moved on. Detective Jensen's work underscored that justice need not be immediate to be effective. The delayed revelation did not diminish the impact of the truth. If anything, it amplified it. The ability of science to recall what history had obscured brought both fear and hope. Fear that the seemingly trusted might hide unthinkable deeds, and hope that even the most hidden crimes can eventually surface. For viewers following this story, the message is clear. DNA never forgets, and the past can reach into the present with undeniable clarity. This silent, irrefutable proof changes everything it brings: accountability, closure, and a stark reminder that justice may be delayed, but it cannot be denied. Subscribe so justice doesn't stay buried in your town too. After decades of silence, Leonard Thorne sat across from Detective Jensen in a small, unremarkable interrogation room. The man who had once commanded respect in the classroom, who had greeted generations of students with a reassuring smile, now faced a truth that could no longer be ignored. Jensen placed the DNA report and forensic findings on the table, letting the evidence speak before he uttered a single word. Thorne's composure wavered only slightly, a flicker of the burden he had carried for 55 years. He did not offer excuses, nor did he dwell on the past. Instead, he spoke with cold precision, revealing the one detail that had remained hidden all this time: the location of Angela Schweitzer's final resting place. The confession was succinct, chilling in its matter-of-fact delivery. Decades of unanswered questions, every sleepless night for Owen, every rumor whispered among students, all converged into that moment. Detective Jensen wrote each word with careful attention, understanding the gravity of what had been disclosed. This confession would direct the next phase of the investigation, the payoff of decades-long frustration. For the first time in more than half a century, the mystery that had haunted Ann Arbor had a tangible endpoint. The weight of the revelation settled over the room. The past, long buried in the city's streets, and in the minds of those who had never stopped searching, was about to surface. It was no longer a story of absence and unanswered questions. Angela Schweitzer's story was approaching its resolution, and the quiet confession of Leonard Thorne marked the final bridge between suspicion and certainty. Every detail of the burial location, conveyed calmly by Thorne, became a map to justice long delayed. And in that moment, Detective Jensen knew the excavation would not only uncover the remains, but also confront a community with the truth it had feared to acknowledge for decades. The following morning, a team of investigators arrived at the site. Leonard Thorne had identified the overgrown corner near the old foundation of the University of Michigan Law Library wing. What had once been an open excavation in 1966 was now a forgotten, paved-over access road, surrounded by creeping weeds and patches of unkempt grass. Time had hidden the truth under layers of concrete and neglect, yet the secret had waited, untouched, for those willing to uncover it. Shovels struck the earth with methodical rhythm. Each layer removed revealed not just soil but decades of silence and unanswered questions. Detective Jensen watched as the team carefully documented every moment, knowing that every motion, every fragment of displaced earth, carried immense significance. The air was heavy with anticipation. For years, Angela Schweitzer had existed in memory and rumor. Now, she was about to return to the tangible world. The past and present converged in every scoop of soil. Investigators worked in near silence, the only sounds being the scrape of metal against earth and the occasional murmur of observation. Each inch closer to the target was a step toward justice and closure. The community, oblivious to the ongoing excavation, would soon witness a truth that had remained hidden for more than 5 decades. For Owen Schweitzer, the waiting was both unbearable and necessary. He had spent a lifetime imagining the site where his sister had been lost, and now, with the excavation underway, the imagination would meet reality. Detective Jensen ensured that every precaution was taken to preserve the integrity of the remains once uncovered, understanding that the delicate work in the dirt would soon yield the story long left untold. As the soil yielded to shovels, the investigators approached the moment of revelation. Angela Schweitzer, erased from the world in 1966, was about to be remembered not through rumor or memory, but through the undeniable evidence of her final resting place. Finally, the moment arrived. Beneath layers of time, dirt, and concrete fragments, a hint of what had been hidden began to surface. The team's shovels struck something denser than soil, and careful hands revealed the remains of Angela Schweitzer. The scene, silent yet loaded with decades of grief, brought an immediate, heavy awareness to everyone present. Detective Jensen stepped closer, ensuring the process was carried out with utmost respect. Each piece recovered told its own story. The olive-green corduroy jacket, the remnants of a life cut short, fragments of Angela's personal items, all perfectly preserved in their silent testament. It was the culmination of years of searching, technological breakthroughs, and unyielding dedication. The earth had finally delivered its truth, and the evidence, once invisible, now demanded recognition. The emotional impact rippled through the team. Even the most hardened investigators felt the weight of 55 years compressed into this single discovery. Angela's presence, long reduced to a name and a legend in the city, had returned undeniable, human, and tragically real. Every thought of missed opportunities, every lead that had gone cold, collided in this moment of revelation. For Owen Schweitzer, seeing the recovered remains was both shattering and relieving. Years of uncertainty, nights of imagined scenarios, and decades of silent hope converged into this instant. He could now see, touch, and finally comprehend the truth of his sister's fate. The closure, though steeped in sorrow, offered a tangible endpoint to a story that had haunted his life since youth. The recovery marked more than a procedural win. It was the emotional peak of a half-century-long journey. Angela Schweitzer's story, once suspended between absence and memory, had been grounded in reality. The pain of loss, now fused with the relief of discovery, resonated deeply. A moment of history finally reconciled with truth. With the remains recovered, the city of Ann Arbor was confronted with a reality that had lingered in its collective subconscious for decades. Owen Schweitzer, now a man hardened by years of uncertainty and sorrow, stepped forward to address the truth that had finally been revealed. The burden he had carried alone, the questions that had never found answers, were no longer abstract. They were tangible, undeniable, and final. Standing near the excavation site, Owen's voice trembled only slightly as he spoke, the weight of half a century of waiting pressing into every word. We always knew she was waiting for us to find her. Now she can finally rest, he said, his eyes reflecting a mixture of grief, relief, and vindication. Those words, simple yet profound, carried the story of a life interrupted and a family forever changed. They were a testament to resilience and the enduring pursuit of truth. The emotional resonance extended beyond Owen. Every investigator, every officer who had touched this case, felt the gravity of the moment. The decades of frustration, the silent files, the unanswered leads, all converged here. The recovery was not just about solving a mystery. It was about restoring a name to its rightful place in memory, about affirming that Angela Schweitzer's life, though tragically cut short, mattered beyond the passage of time. The community, long familiar with the story as a whisper, a cautionary tale, now confronted the undeniable reality. The arrest of Leonard Thorne, once a trusted principal, coupled with the recovery of Angela's remains, challenged perceptions of safety, trust, and the hidden darkness that can exist behind ordinary lives. It reminded everyone that the smallest overlooked details, the textbook, the clay, the coffee cup, could hold truths powerful enough to span generations. For Owen, closure was neither complete nor simple. The pain remained, etched deep by 55 years of loss. But it was now accompanied by an endpoint, a tangible resolution. Angela's presence was no longer a shadow in memory. She had returned through the evidence, the recovery, and the acknowledgement of her life and absence. In this moment, the half-century of waiting, of hope mingled with despair, reached its conclusion. The city, the family, and the investigators alike had borne witness to justice, finally delivered, and to the enduring power of perseverance, truth, and the human spirit. The courtroom buzzed with a tension that had not been felt in Ann Arbor for over 55 years. Leonard Thorne, once a respected principal, now a defendant in the coldest case the city had ever known, sat silently as the trial commenced. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, and the community watched, collectively holding its breath. Every detail, every look, every whispered reaction carried the weight of decades-long anticipation. Detective Miles Jensen testified first, laying out the evidence with precision. He described the recovered clay, the degraded skin cells, and the forensic breakthroughs that finally linked Thorne to Angela Schweitzer. Each point struck the courtroom with increasing force. The olive green corduroy jacket, the discarded textbook, the meticulous excavation, all became tangible proof of a hidden crime, forcing the audience to reconcile the man they had trusted with the man now accused of unspeakable acts. The prosecution painted a picture of deception and decades of silence, while the defense attempted to frame Thorne's life of service as character testimony, a shield against the overwhelming evidence. But the DNA, paired with the confession of the burial location, left little room for doubt. Every piece of evidence was a stark reminder that appearances could deceive, and that trust, once misplaced, could hide unimaginable truths. The courtroom, though formal and ordered, became a theater of collective shock. Former students of Thorne whispered to one another, neighbors stared at the accused with disbelief, and families like the Schweitzers followed every revelation with bated breath. For the first time in more than half a century, the story of Angela Schweitzer, once a ghost suspended between memory and rumor, was being laid bare in full, unflinching detail. The trial's opening day reminded everyone that justice, even if delayed by decades, could confront the most unlikely faces, and that the consequences of hidden darkness were real, tangible, and irrevocable. The verdict arrived quietly, yet it carried the weight of generations. Leonard Thorne was convicted of the murder of Angela Schweitzer, the culmination of 55 years of unanswered questions, frustration, and sorrow. Life imprisonment was handed down, a sentence both simple in wording and profound in consequence. The courtroom exhaled, as if the decades of tension could finally be released, though the relief was tempered by the bitter knowledge of how long justice had waited. The reaction outside was immediate and electric. Former students who had once revered Thorne as a mentor grappled with disbelief. Neighbors whispered in shock, unable to reconcile the image of a silver-haired, community-focused principal with the dark reality the court had confirmed. Social media erupted, the story spreading globally, highlighting how one individual's double life had hidden in plain sight for over half a century. For Owen Schweitzer, the conviction was both a moment of vindication and sorrow. He had spent a lifetime imagining this moment, yet nothing could erase the pain of losing a sister to a crime that had remained unresolved for so long. Standing with his family after the proceedings, Owen's eyes reflected a complex blend of grief and relief, a testament to the long, unbroken vigil of hope that had guided him through decades of silence. Detective Jensen, observing from the back of the courtroom, allowed himself a quiet acknowledgement of success. The painstaking combination of forensic technology, patient research, and intuition had finally delivered a conclusion that generations had waited for. The city had witnessed a reckoning, a pillar of society exposed, a family given closure, and the long shadow of doubt finally lifted. The conviction underscored a chilling reality. Appearances can deceive. Time cannot erase truth. And the relentless pursuit of justice, however delayed, can ultimately restore balance and honor the memory of those who were silenced. The shockwaves from the trial didn't end in the courtroom. They rippled through every corner of Ann Arbor. A man once celebrated for his dedication to education, Leonard Thorne, had been exposed as someone capable of hiding a crime for more than 5 decades. Former students, neighbors, and colleagues struggled to reconcile the persona they had admired with the reality that had been revealed. Conversations that once centered on school memories and community events now lingered on disbelief and betrayal. Parents questioned who they could trust. Teachers second-guessed the familiar faces in their hallways, and the city itself faced a collective reckoning. How could someone so integrated into society, so seemingly committed to shaping young minds, harbor such a devastating secret? The realization spread. Evil can reside behind the most ordinary smiles, and trust, once broken, leaves lasting fractures in the fabric of a community. Local news outlets covered every angle, from personal testimonies to psychological analyses, emphasizing the cultural and emotional impact. The story became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that the outward appearance of virtue does not guarantee safety. Every handshake, every nod of approval, was now tinged with the potential for deception. For Owen Schweitzer and Angela's remaining family, the cultural shock was overshadowed by relief. They had spent decades navigating public narratives, whispers, and assumptions. Now, the truth had emerged, validating their silent vigilance and long-held concerns. Angela was no longer just a story, a name, or a ghost they had recovered. Not only her remains but also a measure of justice that resonated through the lives of all who had been touched by her absence. The city learned, painfully, that appearances could not be trusted. The echoes of betrayal reminded everyone that vigilance, empathy, and accountability were necessary, even in the most familiar communities. With Leonard Thorne convicted, the focus shifted from the man to the life he had taken. Angela Schweitzer, once a name whispered in fear and curiosity, now emerged as more than a ghost. Her story, her ambitions, and her presence became the central narrative, reclaiming her from decades of silence. The city that had known her only as a mystery began to honor her as a person whose life had mattered, whose absence had left a void no passage of time could fill. Memorials were quietly held, candles lit, and letters left at the university's campus. Students, past and present, shared memories of Angela's intellect, her laughter, and her radiant energy that had once filled library reading rooms and late-night study corners. Through storytelling, community events, and reflective discussions, Angela's name became a symbol of resilience, of remembrance, and of the pursuit of justice long overdue. Owen Schweitzer, now aged but steadfast, worked to ensure that Angela's life would be celebrated alongside the justice she had finally received. He spoke to gatherings, offered insights into her dreams of publishing, and described her compassion, her love for literature, and her commitment to her community. In doing so, he shifted the narrative. Angela was no longer defined by her disappearance, but by the vibrancy and potential of the life she had led, brief as it had been. Her legacy inspired reflection on societal responsibility, vigilance, and the importance of remembering victims as full individuals, not just statistics or unsolved cases. Schools discussed her story in ethics and history courses, emphasizing the dual lessons of personal integrity and community accountability. Through these efforts, Angela Schweitzer became more than a case file. She became a reminder. Truth, memory, and justice, even delayed, can restore dignity to lives interrupted, and her story would continue to resonate, teaching future generations the weight and value of every human life. The conclusion of the Angela Schweitzer case leaves a city transformed. Leonard Thorne, once a pillar of trust and respect, now serves as a stark reminder that appearances can deceive, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, can emerge. Communities are forced to confront uncomfortable questions. Who do we trust? How well do we truly know those around us? The trial and conviction rippled beyond Ann Arbor, serving as a cautionary tale for anyone who assumes safety based on familiarity or reputation. Angela's name, once a ghost that haunted whispered conversations, has been restored to memory and meaning. Her life, her hopes, and her dreams are no longer eclipsed by the shadows of her disappearance. The remembrance of her story is a testament to patience, perseverance, and the relentless pursuit of justice, proving that even decades of silence cannot erase the value of one human life. To all of you watching, think about the people you encounter every day. How well do you truly see them? And for those who follow stories like Angela's, don't let these lessons fade. Subscribe to stay informed, join the conversation, and share your thoughts. Comment below. Should trust always be earned, even from those who seem beyond reproach? Engage, discuss, and reflect. Every voice matters, every perspective counts. Angela Schweitzer's story doesn't end with justice. It lives on in the hearts of those who remember her, the lessons we take from her loss, and the vigilance we carry forward. Let this be a reminder. Monsters can wear good suits, but truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how long it takes.